I am back from Vietnam just yesterday. I got in, actually my flight was pretty early in the morning, smooth as ever, and it's good to be back in Thailand, back in Bangkok. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about my experience over there. I have the video, of course, that's me walking through the streets. I don't know if it'll come before or after this video, but you will get to actually see it rather than just like pure talking head video. But there's still things like, regardless of what I'd say there, I'd talk about here. So how the world changes, and it's in one case, I know I'll get to do this now when I get older than I am now, of course, but it's like, it's just a comment on, man, oh man, when you go around to these places, I don't even need to have visited them in the past, but they're so developed now. You know, I think if you talk to people, I'm trying to think of the change, like the biggest change. I think the biggest one to traveling is obviously, and correct me, give me your thoughts if you'd like in the comments down below about what you think is changing it the most. But I feel like the biggest thing would be the internet, and then of course following that, the biggest thing in terms of like being able to navigate around, just getting more comfortable in a country where it's completely foreign to you, would be having a smartphone, because then you can use Google Maps. You don't have to look at like foreign maps or anything. It's so much easier to kind of get around in these places once that's been the case. But to say nothing of just the kind of general natural beauty of where I was, because I had gone over to Da Nang. I believe I was saying Da Nang. I think it's a little softer than that, Da Nang. And when I was in Da Nang, what struck me is how developed it is, really. I mean, there are some small, well, maybe not small, there's significant elements where you're like, oh, okay, you would call this a developing country. But then it's really only that it's an outdoor seating area in a tropical area and things are affordable. That's the only thing at that point. But you're like, the room is very nice. This is incredibly clean all around me. Across the street I can see, you know, like this building that's been put up in the last like year that's gorgeous. So there's still these wonderful pieces of the society that very much, I think, define the culture. Like, of course, as soon as I was there for about 5 minutes, that you start getting like reels or whatever, and it talked about drinking 50-cent beers in cafes, sitting looking at the flowers in Vietnam. And I was like, yeah, I can see that immediately. That's just something cool to do here. It won't matter how developed it becomes. But that's something that very strictly, as soon as you arrive, you're like, okay, these outdoor seating kind of things, that's just cultural. But as I say, the amount of superstructures going up, it reminds me like they used to joke when I was on the UBC campus in Vancouver. They used to joke that all the cranes in Canada were on UBC campus because there was so much construction going on there. But what I found to be true is rather that all the cranes of all the worlds are in all the cities of all the worlds. It's developing like mad everywhere. I look out the window here in Bangkok and I can count them. Let's do it for fun. Just randomly, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I can see 5, yeah, maybe 6 massive new condo skyscrapers and buildings going up right now. And that's just out this one little tiny window here. And when I was in Da Nang and you're walking along the street there, it's the exact same thing. Like the level of development and the rate of development is absurd. You could go into another conversation, which is it's nuanced and it's got a lot of character to it, regarding, I don't know, you could definitely argue now the rate at which other countries are coming online, this for our carbon emissions is probably worrying. But then it's this idea of like what, so the original developing countries, say in North America and Europe, got a chance to do this, and now Southeast Asian countries get a chance. That they can't participate in that economy, so you realize like that's incredibly hypocritical. Why could they not? You know, you're like shaking your finger at them saying, how could you pollute like this? But then you've been doing it for years. There is, though, as I say, nuance there, because just because you're developing rapidly doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be with great environmental damage. I think a lot of new initiatives now, if we only thought just a little more about what we were doing and we're not quite so reckless, that a lot of new initiatives could be environmental positive initiatives that also bring up our economy. You know, it's kind of an old talking point, but I think it's a real one. It's not just, you know, lip service, that if you create an industry that is clean, then you have all these clean jobs that go into it. You know, if you're getting wind farms to be built, well, now you have jobs. People need to build wind farms, and that's a clean energy source. So the idea of development doesn't always have to go hand in hand with pollution, but I think it's clearly a concern. You'd be burying your head in the sand if you didn't think that all of this rapid development wasn't having some kind of effect like that. It becomes more layered, though, I have to say, because I think one of the reasons that you have, say, pollution in these third world countries is also less to do with the industrial complex necessarily maturing, but it's also to do that they don't have an established infrastructure as well established to clean. So that's another thing. It's like, well, their infrastructure to clean could even improve, right? So like, you want to encourage all of that. And I'm really impressed. I think there's something of, when you travel, absolutely, now as I say it, I think this is true. As you travel, you get some sense of a universal human spirit, or maybe just a living creature human spirit, right? I think we all get moved by these things, whether you're an animal or a human, which is an animal as well, but that the way that we need to survive, the way that we appreciate community, we appreciate warmth, we appreciate the shared humanity that I'm touching on now is, it's a wonderful thing that you get a sense of. And in that shared humanity, their desire to improve their lives is just like all of us, right? Like it's, there's some real kinship in struggle, isn't there? That you would, like, if you're struggling and then you go somewhere else and you see other people struggling, you're like, oh yeah, we really are the same. Good too, just for your own mindset. I think that like removing these barriers of otherness, not like they have to be there. It's not like you have to meet people, otherwise you're never going to be able to see another human being as like yourself unless they're identical. You know, that's not the case. We're capable of that empathy, but it certainly helps, doesn't it, if you go and have these firsthand experiences in these countries. It's great. So I think it is something great that you're seeing as this goes on. This kind of like, you know, this is just the modernization of the world. But I was also thinking that while it is exciting to always look forward to the future and the crazy things that can come from it, and also to be very proudly in the moment thinking that what a great modern time it is that we live in, it's just the course of history that modern time you're in now is going to become old. And I think I feel the oldness or the transitional point that we're at that is so distinct. It would kind of like the feeling of somebody maybe after the First World War, where all of this technological advancement had occurred, research into blood, you know, like a lot of medical research, where you're like, oh, it is a new world now. We can see the line that we have crossed. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's that we are at, maybe goes without saying, I know people see it a lot. The easy one would be like, wow, AI, that's huge. That's going to change everything. But then, of course, going along, if we take a deeper look at the world around us right now, it sort of goes with everything else that's occurring, isn't it? It's just everything is so developed now. And we're coming out of this like last stage of like old school capitalism. Like, I know it's going to change. That's another thing too, is like whatever this model is that we currently have, it can't survive for much longer. And not only is that like that model of politics, it can't work, whether we say it collapses or evolves, who knows, but then you see it in the world. That's a thing now where it's like this description of like, oh, I love to visit a developing country. I don't think for very much longer you're going to be able to say a developing country. Now, some people may be like, oh, that's far away. Well, it's going to finish up in different times in different areas, right? Like, yes, you could probably in the next 20 years still find a country that was finally now able to pull itself up and its economy is booming or whatever, and it's like drawn into this global market. But for the most part, I think they're all doing it at a rapid rate now that the vast majority, and even ones that you would consider developing within 10 years, it's all, it's going to be completely different. They would be considered just as we would in North America or in Europe or in, wherever else that's very well developed. And that's just going to be this the sad thing that's gone. You know, I think obviously, you know, hearkening back to what I'm saying about the convenience of the things like the internet and then our smartphones to then leverage the internet even further. But there were all these bold human moments, weren't there, when you didn't have that bridge of communication that required a little more initial bravery to connect with another human being, and that is very cool. I'm sure that while I was in Japan, because of the technology that I had, which allowed me to insulate myself more, to, you know, just do whatever I wanted to do, it absolutely denied me certain experiences I would have had where I'm more thrown into the pool, we'll say. I did get a few though. My good friend Tomo, which is awesome because not obviously, the word for friend in Japanese is tomodachi. And I would go to the gym and there was this guy there. I talked about him even when I was in Japan. I liked this guy so much. He was such an interesting character to run into. Worked out like a demon. He must have been about 80 years old or something. I mean, this guy was old as the hills and one of the healthiest men I've ever seen. He was like always there in the gym with his wife, working out, sweating like a demon, came up fearless, not typical for Japanese, would try and tell me his, he would tell me his like kanji name, and he was like, Tomo, friend. I was like, oh, cool. And we talked a little bit. He eventually invited me over to his traditional home in the Japanese countryside to meet his family, which was his sons who had children. Like, he's old enough, they're all grown up, had their families, but went out to this traditional, beautiful townhouse in the Japanese countryside. And then it was like some history there. Like, he was old enough that he said, oh, that grain silo there, not silo, it was like basically this farm building. It was like they used that during the Second World War once we had become occupied to store food there. I was like, that's wild. This is so interesting. But so yeah, those kind of experiences. Well, we'll always be able to have new and novel human experiences together, but we must acknowledge and say that I think these will be less and less that you would have. But that's okay because it's evolving into something new, but I like to acknowledge them at the very least. So maybe it's a little bit of encouragement that also I can see that this is a bit bourgeois, where you're like, go out and see the world with its rough edges before they're gone so you can get a taste of it. But I think you can do this genuinely. I don't think you have to go out with a sort of royal perspective on it. There's as long as you're going in humble, there's nothing that we can do for our station. That's something I refuse to be eaten by guilt for the fact that I cannot help the advantages that I've had, so I'm not going to feel guilty for them, but you can be humble about it, and that's all you got to do. And as soon as you're like this, nobody cares. I've never felt above or below anybody in these countries, so long as you have the right mindset, and people treat you that way too, which is nice. So it'll be interesting. This is me entreating people to, like, yeah, if you do want some, maybe you're from a rougher country too, I don't know, you're like, I just want more rough country. But go to these places. I use rough, generally speaking. You know, it's just not quite as squeaky clean, all of the edges, you know, shaved off or whatever as it is in many places in North America. Although, now that I wanted to make this video actually much more free-form, where I was like, I will have my clear idea, but then there's so many interesting things that had entered into my head. I was thinking about, developing countries, gone. That's one thing that's really interesting here. Oh, the experiences that will then go along with that. Well, they were already sort of, what would you say, falling away, but now even more so. There's a very interesting thing happening in, I think it would be fair to say, I've seen enough news on it in the UK, and definitely North America, is the problem that we have created in our societies due to, I have no single answer for it, but I'm guessing there is a polarization of wealth. That is true. I think that it's more than a talking point to say that there is a eroding, that's a word I wanted to use, an eroding middle class. And as a result, these shiny, developed first world countries in a lot of their major cities are developing quite the rough edges that they once never had, or they never looked like this before. This is another way that I think of how the world has definitely crossed lines in so many different places that you could definitively say that now this is not the Canada of old, or this is not the America of old, or this is not the Britain of old. And it's mostly around the homeless problems that they have there. It was always a thing. If you've been to Vancouver, there's this area there called the Lower East Side, and if you looked it up now, if you looked it up now, it's horrendous. And I bet you could see videos of the world that we live in now of people posting from there within the last like 2 days. And whenever I lived in Vancouver, it was infamous and incredibly dangerous, and there were a lot of people there. And I have this one story I could tell where this bright, free soul, Christina, she's a wonderful girl. I was my girlfriend at the time. She was from Spain, and she's a world explorer. You know, that's how she ended up in Canada. And she wanted me one day to take her through the Lower East Side. She was like, well, just take a bus through it. And I was like, I don't think you understand what you're asking me to do. That's incredibly dangerous, but okay, let's just do it. We'll get on the bus. And there was like, at every single bus stop on the way to her place, there were fights outside the bus. There were people who got on the bus who were staring at her because she looks a higher social status than people who are usually on it because of her clothes. And so that makes her a target. And she didn't want to do that again afterwards. I was like, right, I think you learned, I think you saw it, you've seen enough. I'm sure there's nasty places in Spain, but definitely the Lower East Side competes with this. And my point, now that I tell you that scary story where we went and did that, that was when I was a younger man, and I would have been about 27, I would say. It has changed a lot in that time. 7 years since then. When I look at videos now, it's insane. It's the saddest thing in the world. It's a sort of zombie tide of these disassociated, drugged up, just sad mess, a lump of society here. And so to blame this completely on them, obviously there's a lot of like personal agency that can land you in those situations, but some pressure in society has increased that. Because is it that suddenly humans just got way, way lazier? Or could it be other circumstances that might be lending or incentivizing that people end up in this situation? Something must be happening. I don't know, maybe it's the $3,000 or $2,200 for rent in a month. Who knows? This is a long-winded story because I wanted to give you a little flavor, talk about Vancouver a bit, but it's to say that I don't know that the developed countries look so developed anymore. The developed countries, yeah, they've got this infrastructure that's shiny and new, especially, well, let's say in Canada, we have good infrastructure. I know America's making efforts to get that infrastructure up, but it's in pretty rough shape. But it used to be known for that, right? It was like anything in North America had to be new. I mean, that's the only thing it could be because nobody had lived there. It was the new world. But whether it's that infrastructure hasn't been maintained, whether it's the social policies that have created this polarization in wealth, but we have progressed, certainly. You could look at so many metrics across the board that would say, like, whether from literacy to health to so on, but there are elements which have regressed in these societies as well. So it is more to make a general point. I'm more making a general point at this moment to say that the playing field is as well not so clear anymore because of the compounding social problems. Where are you really this like shining beacon on the hill when like just at the bottom, the foot of the hill is just this mire of like dying humanity? Where, for example, when I went to Da Nang, where I was the other day, I'm probably staying away from any, well, let's not complicate the point. Lower East Side has a lot of homeless people, but you'll just see a lot of homeless people in Vancouver generally. When I was in Da Nang, I didn't see a single homeless person. It's not a small area either. Not a single homeless person here. It's all beautiful with purple flowers and yellow, and everybody's drinking their 50-cent beers, seeming to really enjoy it, honking incessantly at each other, but gently as to not cause conflict. I wonder, who is the developing country at this point now? So that's me touring all over the place, but it's a moment for me to recall, because I think here, more than anything, that we are at this massive, massive transitional period. I'm trying to decide from day to day to day which is the most significant. But every time I think that we've had the most significant day or like some huge news drop in 2024 that'll make it even crazier, it's exceeded by the following. So yeah, I think it's only going to be me saying things like this more and more for the next while, but I'm completely comfortable with that because I feel prepared by my unique life to embrace it. This is the sort of stuff I've read about and I find interesting, and I like change. I like novelty. I think all humans like novelty, but I especially do. I'm very curious. That's it. Very curious. Well then, cool little reflection on the developing world, how sweet Vietnam is, how perhaps we need a little more reflection in our own countries in terms of what we are defining as modern. Also, to encourage people that there are some, not that everything is always in the last chance you might be able to see it, but especially now. And so I think there's great value in being able to travel. I know that there is some tone deafness maybe as well. I do know, so let's remove the tone deafness. I know everybody can't pick up and travel right now too. It's like, in this economy? So it just means if you can, it's something to appreciate. Or maybe you could look at it this way. If you've already done some traveling, that's really cool, because you will have caught the world at a moment that I think was stable for a little while. This sort of, it's developing, but it's still like you can see that very much that it's lifting itself out of a previous economic state. But that ain't gonna be around for much longer. And that I'm sure that that's what the people who have a lower standard of living would appreciate in their countries, and so who would blame them? All right, I'm gonna do a ton of stuff today, and this was fun. Who knows what the next Talking Head video will be about. Don't do anything they tell you to do at the end of YouTube videos.